Are those new plants behind you, Jason?
I'm glad you noticed. I know I committed
nice.
2 days ago to have them. Thank you, man. They're local. They're, there's a shop in Vancouver that does this sort of thing. My wife got them, and I know I told you that I would have plants yesterday, but it took us 2 days because the way that the plant shop, is that the name? Is there a name for plant shops? There's another kind of plant shop, but I'm not talking about those plant shops. A nursery. Maybe. They're operating on different schedules in different ways in light of COVID-19. And so we couldn't pick them up yesterday. It was very specific time windows to pick up in a certain way. So here we are with some fresh plants, and it's really made a difference for my office.
Yeah, can you name them? I wouldn't be able to name them, so I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just curious.
This is what'd you say that was? You knew that one. That was a
snake grass.
Snake grass.
Well, yeah,
and then I don't know. This one's very cool.
On the ground.
Look at that. Oh, nice.
Snake grass.
I don't know what this is called, but it's very cool.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Maybe it's a succulent. I don't know.
It looks it looks almost aloe-ish,
So today, you know what? Sometimes, we could use the plant analogy and it would help us with illuminating the text. But there's no connection. I tried there for a second, but it's just an update on the plants and then a hard stop, full transition to today's text.
I felt my mind was asking for one too.
Yeah. So we're going to read Mark chapter 9, verse 2 to 13. So if you want to read that, you can pause. But before you pause to read it, I want to read a different verse that's going to actually help us make sense of this. And it's Hebrews. It's from Hebrews. And Hebrews is a great book if you want to understand more about how the Old Covenant, which is the law of God expressed in the Old Testament, and the New Covenant, which is the new promise that's made known through Jesus and is what's articulated in the New Testament. If you want to understand the relationship, like a lot of questions I have are around like the sacrificial system and the temple of the Old Testament, the tabernacle, how does that work in light of Jesus and the laws of the Old Testament? Hebrews, among some other passages of scripture, is really helpful. But listen to this. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things. And through him, he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. I'm going to go back to that first verse. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son. So with that in mind, we come to the story of the Transfiguration. Mm-hmm. And in this story, Ben, do you want to summarize this story?
Well, yeah. In this story, Jesus pulls 3 of his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, and they go up a mountaintop, and it says Jesus is transfigured before them, and his clothes become radiant, intensely white, and like no one on earth could bleach them. It's a fun note there. And then it says there appeared with him is Elijah and Moses, and they were talking with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And so that's why I use that verse from Hebrews. It talks about like in the past, God spoke through prophets. And so anyone who's like, we've talked about this before, but the Jewish audience wouldn't have missed a beat on this one. They would have seen the surface stuff, which is obvious, like Moses and Elijah, such important figures in the story of Israel. And these are prophets. And this is why the writer of Hebrews says, in the past, God spoke through prophets. But in these last days, he's speaking through his Son. And so we have this relationship where it's like we see this culmination of this story of the people of Israel all kind of coming to this massive dynamic moment. And it's and then even the cool notes, like it talks about Jesus radiating. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And like in Mount Sinai is the story of Moses going up the mountain. And so the people of God are wandering in the wilderness. Moses goes up a mountain. They're on a mountain. And this is such a key story in the story of Israel. Goes up a mountain, and on that mountain, he meets with God. The glory of God descends. That's what happens here. So everyone's thinking, I know exactly. This is pulling back to Mount Sinai. On Mount Sinai, God does like a determine the relationship. Do you ever, the term DTR?
Oh, yeah, like, DTR, yeah.
Determine
or define the relationship? That's usually...
Exactly. Yeah. You're right. It's define the relationship. Yeah. That's what's going down with Moses on behalf of the people of God, and God, where he's putting the parameters around his relationships, all the law and regulations. And that's when he comes down with the 10 Commandments among all the other laws for them. This really defining moment. And now we have, fast forward, Jesus up a mountain. Oh no, and then when Moses comes down, do you remember?
He was radiant.
He was radiating, not because he had the glory, but he was reflecting God's glory. But then we fast forward, and in this story, Jesus isn't reflecting God's glory. He is radiating himself. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden we have this incredible sort of picture. It almost says it's like this story that was important, but it's totally different. And what's different is the key.
And the Hebrews says it. It says he long ago he spoke to us through the prophets, and now he speaks to us through his son. And what happens just a little bit further down in this story is that it says the voice comes from heaven, and the Heavenly Father says a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus alone. And so there's this moment where the Heavenly Father says, this is my son. And it's not just like you were saying, Moses then reflecting the glory. It's actually Jesus himself is the radiance of God. He is the reflection of God. And he's the son. Now he's the one who's representing God to us.
Yeah, there's this moment where it's like, it's not that the prophets don't matter anymore. They're so important. It's not that the law doesn't matter anymore, but the law has been fulfilled in Jesus. The prophets have been fulfilled in Jesus. So it's almost like they're there with him. Mm-hmm. There's this succession, like here's the culmination, but then the glory of God comes and they're gone. And because we have this new era bursting in, coming through Jesus. And there's a little hint about some things about this new era, like Peter wants to build tents. That's probably what most translations say.
Well, like in the middle there, Peter has this moment where he says, it says, Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good that we're here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And then it says, for he did not know what to say. They were terrified.
Yeah. So he's just trying to come up with ideas. But I think Mark wants us to see that the word used for tents is tabernacle. And in the Old Covenant, like in the Old Testament, the way there was this important thing in the people of Israel, which was this tabernacle, which they believed housed the presence of God. It was this connection point between God and man, the tabernacle. That's where they go, perform sacrifices and connect with God. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, Peter suggests, in light of all this, we should build tents. And it's like, no, we don't need tents because the presence of God isn't confined to a tent now in Jesus. It's available for everyone to access around the world, anytime, any place. Jesus has ushered in this whole new era of the presence of God on planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even as you're saying that, I'm thinking that's what's happening right now. The Christian church around the world can still worship, can still connect with God and each other, even though we have to limit the size of gatherings, and a lot of churches have to shut down their services. It's like, no, we can still worship because our God isn't limited to that space where he's with the people, his spirit's with the people.
Oh, I love it. So I hope that this helps open up this story for people of the Transfiguration. I think there's a lot going on there. And if you want to, go ahead and read the story in Exodus of Mount Sinai, and then come back to this story and maybe read that verse in Hebrews and then ask the question, what's the same in these stories and what's different? And I think that's a lot is illuminated in that comparison.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Sweet. I'm going to go tend to my plants.
Oh, perfect.